a lot of people, including black people, will cringe, recoil, and protest at the thought of a black God. I remember seeing a meme online once when this discussion of Jesus being black was brought up, and an auntie exclaimed and said, "My God is white, please, you can't tell me nothing." And mind you, this auntie was a black woman. Why is it so hard for black people to see themselves as something that is worthy to be worshipped? Why is it that it is so hard to accord black people the status of godship? This, among a lot of other things, are what we're going to be discussing in this video. We are going to be talking about African spirituality, how it became synonymous with Satan, and the idea of a black god. This is meant to be a very open-minded, interesting conversation with like-minded people, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you at the end of this video. So first of all, I want to start this video with a little bit of a disclaimer. When it comes to religion, we all know that religion is a very dicey subject. Religion is a very touchy subject. A lot of people are deeply invested and embroiled in religion, and for good cause. Religion speaks to a deep human condition that nothing else can really speak to unless you have transcended certain levels of spirituality. Now, this conversation is not to speak in an untoward manner about anybody's religion. This is just in a bid to have an open conversation about the reality that we're presented with every day of our lives. So I hope whoever comes to watch this video can engage in this commentary from a place of an open mind, an inquisitive perspective, and curiosity to understand how and why the world works the way it does. I hope we're on the same page. Please keep your comments nice, and let's get on with our video. So over the weekend, I came across this concept on Quora. Somebody started a discussion on, is there a black god, or was there ever a black god? And it raised a lot of interesting conversations. People talked about how Jesus is black and how people refuse to accept that. And people talked about the different gods that were in African society. Now, this jogged my mind a little bit and made me start thinking of a black god and the importance of that representation in the psychology of black people. For the most part, a lot of us grew up seeing posters like these, where you see a white-skinned Jesus defeating a darker-skinned devil. And even though it was not said blatantly that the black man was associated with the dark-skinned devil, it only made sense that this person who was represented in this particular skin tone was representative of the people that come with that skin tone. Now, for a lot of black people, anything that has to do with African religion and African spirituality has really been demonized over years and years and years. We've come to see African spirituality as something that is demonic, barbaric, savage, and something that people cannot take anything from. Now, while there is some truth to this point of view, it doesn't completely negate what was built by Africans in the name of spirituality. Africans understood that spirituality was a communion with the divine. It was an everyday experience of their own divinity in relation to the bigger divinity from which they believed that they came from. Now, this series is going to be diving deeply into the concept of why African spirituality came to be demonized, why it came to be associated with the devil, and what we can learn from African spirituality, African gods, and why this representation is very, very, very important for this community. Now, we know that in recent times, the representation of the devil has come to be seen as a red-skinned individual with horns, no longer a dark-skinned individual with a tail. We know that the representation of the savior is a white-skinned individual with mainly Caucasian features. Now, nobody really knows what God looks like. Everything we know of God is what we have been told of God, and of course in conjunction with people who have had personal experiences of God. But to say that somebody has seen an essence that is God, I doubt that anybody has that experience. We only have come to create concepts from our mind and from what we feel is our personal experience of what God looks like. Now, why is this important? This is important because self-awareness is the entire secret of life. Self-awareness, self-image, and self-identity is the entire secret of an individual's experience in life. When you see yourself a certain way, it is inevitable for you to act in ways that conform with that mind state, that self-image that you have held of yourself. Now, for a lot of Black people, when you add the whole challenge of slavery, you add the whole challenge of colonialism, then you now sprinkle that with a little bit of religion. You understand why there seems to be a kind of idolization of the white man, or an idolization of white-skinned individuals in this society, because everything that comes to represent piety, purity, holiness, one with godliness, has been represented as white to us. So when you see a white person in real life, your mind inadvertently represents that person to yourself as God, because that person looks like God, or that person looks like the concept of God that has been presented to you. Now, this takes me back to the statement that was made at the beginning of this video. Is there a black God? This is the reason why having a black God was important, or this is the reason why that part of representation for Black people is very important, because it is important for every people of any color, any race, any tribe and culture to have something that represents to them a God that is in their own image, because this helps them to see themselves as having the qualities, the attributes, the characteristics, and the behaviors of entities that are eternal, supernatural, powerful, godlike, and holy. Now, in ancient African cultures, there were a lot of gods. There were a plethora of gods. And not only were there gods, there were goddesses, because Africans understood that it was not just one aspect of divinity. They understood that there were two aspects of the divinity, which is the masculine aspect and the feminine principle of divinity. And these two make up one, the divine whole. Now, for ancient Africans, they understood that there were gods and then there were goddesses. The gods had the power of the sun, which is the masculine energy, and the goddesses had the power of the moon, which is the feminine energy. Now, in coming videos, we're going to be dissecting all of these different gods, or as many as we can possibly take, the different gods in ancient African religion, spirituality, and philosophy, mythology, and understanding. Now, these gods were not necessarily worshipped, because Africans did not believe in worshipping a god the way we worship God today. They believed in these gods as entities that they used to communicate with the divine. They believed that these gods were the pathway, the direct communication to the divine. And rather than going to disturb the divine, they could just make their claims to these gods, which were more representative of what their own reality looked like. They were representations of nature, they were representations of the cycle of life, they were representations of the masculine and the feminine principle. And they believed that whenever they had problems, they could just approach these gods to have these problems solved easily without having to disturb the eternal oneness. Now, the concept of Satan, like I said earlier, was an imported concept from Abrahamic religions. Satan is classified as an individual that seduces the children of God into doing things that they would not necessarily do, given their own will and their own responsibility of actions. They would not partake in some of these things. So Satan was that force or that entity that seduced individuals to make what they didn't want to do seem appealing to them, and ensure that they did it against the will and the desire of God. But in African spirituality, there was no such thing as a devil. There were only spirits, and there were different kinds of spirits. While indeed you could look into African spirituality and understand that some of these spirits seem to be very frightening, very dangerous, very scary, those spirits were not inherently bad, neither were they inherently good. That is the paradox, or that has always been the yin and yang philosophy of African spirituality. They didn't believe that these spirits were altogether bad or they were altogether good. These spirits that could do very bad things were also the same spirits that could bless and increase people's lives when it was required for them to do so. African spirituality, for a lot of ancient practitioners, is seen as a knife. It can be used for good and it can be used for evil, depending on the person that is using that knife. Now, where I would say African spirituality has a little bit of an upper hand is that it left the responsibility for your actions in your hands. It made you understand that you were responsible for your action. There was no entity that sat on your shoulder or played with your brain to make you want to act in a certain way. If you did something, it was because you are fully conscious and fully aware of your actions and the repercussions of your actions. And if you didn't do something, it's also because you are fully conscious of your actions and the repercussions of your actions. And they understood that man as an entity was not inherently good and was not inherently bad. The same man that could act in certain ways, funny ways, questionable ways, is the same man that can be good, uplifting, and motivating and inspiring to his society. So it is important to understand that even though these gods had a little bit of mythical properties, seemed like almost made up, seemed like a lot of what you see in superhero movies today, but it was necessary for us to see ourselves representing as godlike participants, being represented as godlike participants, because it made us to demand godlike behaviors from ourselves rather than behaviors that were deceitful, dishonest, and rather than behaviors that were demeaning, deceitful, and dishonest. So, in the coming weeks, we're going to be dissecting the different African gods, the roles that they played in society, and what we can learn from these gods. And I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope you I hope you subscribe, and I hope we are open-minded enough to have this discussion without having to resort to challenges, as we know what it is. These discussions are to help us elevate our minds, elevate our consciousness, and start to see ourselves as people who can be who we want to be, do what we want to do, and have exactly what it is that we want to have, because nobody is less than anybody. We are all equal in the sight and image of God. And on that note, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Don't forget to subscribe. My name is Hadiza Atta, your favorite YouTube teacher, and I shall see you in my next video.